lived on blood. They bled off some of their domestic animals every day instead of slaughtering them. And even today, the Nasai tribes of Africa follow this tradition. Bats, of course, are bloodsuckers and have been used in the illustrations of vampires for goodness knows how long. The foundation knowledge as to what vampires are all about, though, has probably been hidden for thousands of years. We may never know. Magical schools and magicians such as Crowley, who is well known, have occasionally given pieces of pictures, and yet none have had the total picture. Thousands of years ago, there were certain immortals who lost their ability to regenerate their bodies through their former mental means. And they supposedly experimented with substitute methods, and one method which gave a great deal of magnetic regenerative energy to them was the use of warm flesh human blood and sexual fluids and hormones. And some of this knowledge is carried over in secret orders, and occasionally persons go overboard in this direction and they lose all their self-control and restraint. Well, some of the avatars have told us that cells are like persons. They need rejuvenation, and being joined in an opposite energy flux aids this rejuvenation. So rejuvenation techniques using placentas and glandular extracts from sex organs work for the same reason. And some of this background is covered in other presentations that we give, like Earth Story. Well, we all recognize that animals hibernate on occasion when the food supplies or weather problems come on. And a number of humans have had the ability to go into this suspended animation state. A 1903 English mechanic told of a Margaret Bayanuval who remained in a trance for 20 years. It started with a fear of the police visiting her. And another article in 1922, Scientific Monthly, told of many cases of persons being assumed dead, and sometimes even buried, and later coming out of this cataleptic state, and astonishing the viewers, of course. Well, from the accounts of morticians and hospital attendants of our times, there's probably hundreds of such cases every year where people go into suspended animation and later wake up. And how many people have found themselves in such a condition and had their brains go addled on them is hard for anybody to guess about. Many of them probably roamed around. Upsetting a lot of the population in times past. And in some parts of South America and the Caribbean islands, there are voodoo rituals that date back hundreds of years. And voodoo is a mixture of West African religious beliefs and ceremonial magic of earlier Europe and maybe a little touch of Catholic. As the dancers and music put participants in a hypnotic state, they can perform unique dancing. They talk sometimes in spirit language. Well, once hypnotized, it often happens that astral spirits take over their bodies and they can't even remember what they did when they return to normal. Well, one practitioner of voodoo not too many years back was making zombies. The sorcerers would usually use a drug that stopped all the vital signs and put the victim in suspended animation. And once taken for dead, they were buried. And later, they were dug up again and given an antidote and kept drugged. Well, during the labor shortage years in the mid-1900s, the practice got out of hand and the authorities rounded up dozens of these greedy sorcerers and they hanged them. They had hundreds of zombies working in the sugar fields at that time. One of the safeguards used by these sorcerers was to cut out the tongues of these poor unfortunate resurrected slaves so they couldn't reveal who they were. Then they'd keep them under mild sedation so they'd remain slaves, often working for nothing on these sugar plantations. Well, several researchers have found that tetrodotoxin from the pufferfish is the Bokor formula. Today there are thousands of houngans or voodoo priests holding the ignorant in awe or terror to gain their following all over the islands. It's reasonable to assume that the body can easily manufacture its own hormones and or drugs to serve the same purpose when the need arises. And we'll go into this somewhat later here. Well, all cultures have generally recognized witches or shamans as persons of special abilities. Now, the negative witches that we're accustomed to seeing represented have used symbols and spells and samples of a victim to dominate other people, to destroy them and get their way. Well, positive witches and most shamans have used this supernormal ability to aid their fellow humans and upgrade humanity, though. During the Dark Ages, persons with such ability were often branded as witches and given an agonizing death, though, regardless of what they did. Today, hundreds of thousands still follow devil worship and cult leaders who continue in the negative goals that we spoke of, and human sacrifices are still occasionally found. Well, extra normal abilities that are used in any of these cases come from concentration. The rituals are not necessary to those who can mentally concentrate sharply and steadily enough. Because actions which intentionally violate the choice of other people, it is usual to see persons who use their powers for such negative persons get a dose of their own medicine when they do so. And in the early 70s, the karmic action was speeded up. And it's now possible to see unethical persons get repaid for their unethical actions in a matter of weeks or months. And the proof is in the simple observation around you and of people and what they get back. Well, if you think about the long drawn-out rituals that most cults and shamans and other people involved with this work have to perform, you'll see that it's a degree of concentration. It forces them to concentrate, put their mind in certain channels for any length of time there. Well, ghosts have been appearing for as long as there have been records, and the difference between ghosts and spirits, not always recognized, however. And a ghost is actually composed of energy particles put into a particular place and shape by a previous human who was in a violent emotional state at the time. Well, true ghosts then stay in the same general area and reappear when the conditions duplicate the time of the emotional upheaval. What people call ghosts are poltergeists in various spirit forms and other identities. The famed Red Man was not really a ghost when he appeared to Napoleon and Henry IV and Louis VII and other notables of old just before their downfall. Couldn't have been a ghost because it got around too much, even though the term was used here. Well, ghosts and most spirits can be eradicated by water, which is given a countercharge of the mental energy. And the holy water of many churches is an example of this water. And you have to find holy water that is properly charged, and not all churches have priests that can properly charge the water. Now, true ghosts will not pay any attention to people in the area. They'll just wander around on the area that they've always wandered around in.